Good evening, and thank you all for joining us. We'll allow just one more minute for people to participate. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Ryan Burrows, Executive Director of the American Kratom Association, and we are joined this evening by Mac Haddow, Senior Fellow on Public Policy for the American Kratom Association. We called this meeting tonight to discuss the FDA's new Kratom user study, and we will break down the best way to send comments and what the FDA's intentions are with this study. Our goal with this effort is to prevent any anti-Kratom bias. Our Q&A is now open, and I will now turn it over to Mac.
Thanks, Ryan, and welcome to everyone. Before we get into the FDA study, let me give you an update on a couple of issues. We're actually talking to you this evening from Louisville, Kentucky, where the National Conference of State Legislatures is holding their annual legislative summit meeting. We are active participants with NCSL at these meetings because it gives us the opportunity to meet face to face with legislators outside of the hectic schedules that they have during legislative sessions. We did have what's called a learning hub, which was videoed, and we'll circulate that video when we get it back from the vendor so that you can see it. And I'll describe that in 1 second. But we also had a booth, and we got to interact with the thousands of participants at this conference. And so it really is a terrific way for us to establish relationships and friendships with legislators and staffers, and to communicate to them about the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. In the Learning Hub that we did, we featured the messaging about the choice that legislatures have to either criminalize Kratom or to regulate it. And it was, I think, a session that was well received. We had lots of positive comments about the framing of this message, and it was particularly effective because we invited 3 advocates to speak at the Learning Hub, and who also helped us with the booth this week while we're here in Louisville. Heidi Sikora from Wisconsin, who is a powerful advocate who told her story about how she has to travel to Illinois in order to purchase the kratom that she needs in order to alleviate the chronic health issues that she suffers from. Melody Wolf, who all of you know is a well-known advocate, and she credits kratom, of course, with being able to restore her to the level of function where she's one of the fierce advocates for the kratom community, which is absolutely fantastic. And Laura Romney, who is from Utah, and she was one of the first testified about the first Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And I was sitting in the audience and heard her powerful and compelling story. And she was able to share that with legislators here at the Learning Hub. Absolutely fantastic event. Messaging was right, spot on, and something that we're grateful for these advocates for being willing to share their stories in sort of a high pressure environment where you've got all these legislators that are listening along the way. But when you see the video, I think you're going to see how fantastic it was. Second, just to give you an update, I know that there's a lot of information that's being circulated about concerns on what's happening in Indonesia. The Indonesian government is working on and developing a set of regulations that will govern the export of kratom raw materials from Indonesia into the United States and some other countries. This is an ongoing work in progress. There are very difficult issues that we're working on. There is a significant interest in protecting the economic viability of kratom in the country of Indonesia, and in helping the farmers, who are largely indigent people that rely upon the sale of kratom. And if there are market fluctuations that occur, there is a big concern about the impact that has on these farmers and their families. There are over 250,000 farmers who rely upon kratom for their livelihoods. So we're working closely with the government. It's It's difficult sometimes to have those discussions, the language barriers and some of the cultural differences in the way business is conducted. We have a different way of doing business here in the United States. In Indonesia, there's a completely different approach in terms of people that are working with the government in the private sector that have relationships that are governed by some of the financial interests that they have in these issues. And so we're navigating as best we can. I can assure you that some of the rumors that are circulating about the restrictions the government is proposing to implement are either partially true, in some cases completely true, but it doesn't mean they've been finalized yet. And we're working particularly on the ones that would have an adverse impact on us here in the United States. So we do have a delegation that is leaving the United States to go to Indonesia, where we'll have direct conversations with the top level government officials there. That delegation leaves on the 16th. The meetings are in Jakarta on the 19th to the 21st. And then there is a delegation going down to Pontianak and to the remote regions in Hapus there in Indonesia. And our delegation includes some of the top scientists in the world on kratom, including Dr. Chris McCurdy from the University of Florida, Dr. Kirsten Smith from Johns Hopkins University, and Dr. Ed Boyer from Ohio State, and a visiting fellow from Harvard there at Ohio State. And Darshan Singh from the University of Malaysia is going to be joining us as well. So it's going to be a top level meetings with the highest levels of the Indonesian government. We're going to do our best to convey to them how we can resolve these cultural differences in the way that we approach the trade of kratom going forward. And so we'll keep you posted on that and give you some additional details. I can also report to you that we had a meeting here in Washington, D.C. I'm actually in Louisville, but I could say here in Washington, D.C., but we had the meeting there last week with the National Institutes on Drug Abuse and their scientists, with the Indonesian scientists. And it was a fabulous meeting where they identified areas where they can collaborate, where the ongoing scientific research that is occurring in Indonesia right now can align with what we're doing in the United States. And it was an enthusiastic kind of collaboration that went on, which included the director of NIDA, Dr. Nora Volko, who, despite the fact that her family had contracted COVID, so she was able to only join by Zoom into the meeting, which included a couple of dozen people there at the NIDA headquarters. But she stayed on that call and was actively engaged in the discussion for 2.5 hours and reaffirmed her commitment to good kratom research. And we talked about, as a part of some of the discussions, on the disconnect between what the FDA's messaging is with respect to kratom and what the NIDA experience is in terms of research. And that leads us to the discussion of the latest FDA study that was announced in the Federal Register. Anytime we get a notice from the FDA and the Federal Register about kratom, we all obviously are alarmed by it. And because it's either going to be a scheduling recommendation or it's going to be something that the FDA is up to no good on. And I can tell you the latter is the case here. For those of you that had the opportunity to read this notice, the first thing that jumps out at anyone who looks at it is that the FDA is going to conduct a study about behaviors of consumers related to kratom and psychedelics. Psychedelics are Schedule I substances, and kratom is not. And so to put those two products together, it's obviously guilt by association. Now, I don't want to suggest, and I don't, that psychedelics are bad. I think that there's an emerging understanding, including a congressional caucus that's interested in this, led by, in part, by Congressman Bergman, who in his military experience has recognized that some psychedelic therapies can be very, very beneficial for veterans, particularly those suffering from suicidal ideations and other issues that they struggle with after they come back from war. And so certainly there is legitimate inquiries about psychedelic therapies that could potentially be valuable. And we don't begrudge at all that the FDA is interested in studying those things. But the commingling of the discussion about psychedelics and putting it with kratom when they are so vastly different in terms of their categorizations in the supply chain and in the designation of their effects is bizarre, other than it just simply reflects what the FDA's attitude about kratom is. And we all have to just face the absolute reality that this is going to be an attempt by the FDA to further their crusade against kratom. Now, the interesting thing about the Federal Register notice, and you have to actually look at it closely, they are not asking for comments in this Federal Register notice related to kratom or even psychedelics. What they're asking for is the comments on absurd topics. They want to know what you think about whether or not the study will enhance the performance of FDA's functions, including whether the information will have practical utility. That's one of the subjects they're asking for your comments on. Then they want to know whether this study reflects the accuracy of the FDA's estimate on the burden of the proposed collection of information, including the validity of the methodology and assumptions that are used in the study. Then the third thing that they're asking for you and us to comment on is whether or not there are ways to enhance the quality, the utility, and clarity of the information that is collected. And finally, they want to hear our comments on ways to minimize the burden of the collection of information on respondents, including through the use of automated collection techniques where appropriate and other forms of information technology. They're asking for comments from a small group of people in the United States who are experienced in survey research and data collection as to whether or not the techniques that they propose to use are going to give them the outcome that they want. Now, the unstated outcome, of course, is how can we develop a case in order to submit another scheduling recommendation on kratom? Because when you look at what they're attempting to study, you can see that there are some real red flag issues that are developed. Now, interestingly, the FDA has already selected the vendor, and I have no issue with the vendor they've selected, other than it's an interesting process that they announce in their Federal Register notice. They've already got the group, and this is an experienced data collection company that has done observational research, and they have a database they claim to have a database of kratom consumers and psychedelic consumers from which they can identify participants in the study. It may be completely above board, but why? Why would they first select the company and then publish the protocol for the study when what they claim to be asking for comments is whether or not there are better ways to do this than the way that they've identified, and whether the data collection procedures that they've adopted are going to give them a valid result? It seems that you would first ask for that data before you would select a vendor in order. But I can tell you that what the FDA is attempting to do clearly is and this is just a subterfuge on their part, in order to take a set of data that is going to demonize kratom once again. And so I think what's really important for us to do is how do we use this as an opportunity, despite the fact the FDA isn't interested in our comments, but to make comments that will look at the data collection protocol, the specific questions that they're asking this vendor to ask in their collection of data and in the interviews, and mirror that as best we can. What I mean by that is this. We're going to set up a landing page, and we're going to ask kratom advocates to go to that landing page and answer the questions that are already published in the study protocol, so that we can collect data on our own that is far greater than the number of people that they've identified that are their target population. They're looking to have, at the end of the day, a group of people that will have participated in this study that are far less than what I think we're going to be able to generate. And I think that's an important part of it. For example, they want to, at the end of the study, have 36 in-depth interviews for both kratom and psychedelics. That is such an absurdly small sampling of the population. It doesn't seem that they can get to any kind of reasonable, actionable data on that. But then separately, they want to have the questionnaire, which is what we're going to focus on. They want to have 400 respondents. Now, this is a little different than what we did with the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs when the FDA had gone to the UN Commission in 2021 and asked for comments to be given about whether or not the recommendation that was being made at the UN Commission by, and obviously it was the FDA that was one of the leaders in that, whether it should be scheduled internationally. In that effort, we collected 80,000 comments, and obviously that made a huge impact on the expert committee on drug dependence that reviewed those comments. And of course, we published them so that they were valid. They were able to look at them and make sure that they were, in fact, from real respondents. We took great care in doing that. Now, this is going to be a little different because what we're going to do is have you fill out the questionnaire and then provide a narrative that would replace the in-depth interview. So this is going to take a little bit of effort from those that are participating or willing to participate in this effort. It will be open, and obviously there will be Kratom detractors that will try to take advantage of this. So it's important for everyone to not rely on someone else to do this, but rather we invite you to be an active participant in filling out the questionnaire, providing your narrative. And then what will be done is that questionnaire and narrative will be submitted under the comment procedures for this study to the FDA. We will then have that data actually evaluated, and they call it crunching the data by some scientists who will then publish an abstract about it so that we will have replicated what the FDA was trying to do, but we'll do it with an unbiased group of independent scientists that will make an evaluation on the truth about kratom, and it won't be a selected group that we don't have any control over, those 400 or the 38 in the in-depth interview. This will give us an opportunity to give hundreds or maybe thousands of people that can describe exactly the experience about kratom that they have that is already embedded into the design of the study protocol. We will be able to give them more information than the limited subset that they have provided. And obviously that's driven by cost. And I'm not criticizing the FDA by not making it, 1,000 or 2,000. This is a statistically valid sampling size that they can use, but they're limiting it because it costs a lot of money to do this. We're going to go frontal on them and say, we're going to do the same thing that you are doing, but we're going to do it with hundreds or thousands more people so that you get a larger database from which you can actually derive information that is actionable and will directly reflect on this. So procedurally, you'll in the next 10, we've got 60 days, now 55 days left to do this. We're not in any specific rush to do this because when you get the announcement and you start to circulate to all of your friends to invite them to participate in this, you're going to be able to go to the landing page. It might take you 5 to 10 minutes, maybe a little longer, particularly with your narrative as you add to it, so that you can input your information into that landing page. And then, as I say, that will be submitted to the FDA for them to evaluate in the context, even though they're not asking for this information, they'll see clearly that the data that has been collected will provide a very good perspective on the actual experiences that they're soliciting those 400 comments for, and for the 36 people. And again, that's the total universe. Then I would assume they're going to go half and half, so half kratom and half psychedelics. So that's our plan, and we want everyone to understand that the goal here is to provide accurate information from people that have the experience that qualifies them to participate under the study design that's outlined in the Federal Register notice in order to do that. It's actually going to be a straightforward process. As I say, it might take you 10 to 20 minutes maybe to complete this, and that's a little bit tedious, but it will have invaluable benefits for us to be able to hold the FDA accountable. So, for example, if they came out and said, oh, well, this is what we found in our interviews and our questionnaire responses with kratom respondents, and then we have a database that's as large or larger than theirs, and it somehow contradicts what they've collected, then we'll know that they had embedded the bias into that review, because ours is going to be open to everyone. Ours is going to be completely available to anyone who meets the criteria that they've set for participation in this program. And by the way, that criteria is you have to be 18 years or older. You have to have used kratom, psilocybin, MDMA, or LSD in the past 6 months. Don't have to use all of those things. Using kratom is your entry into this. Um, and the vendor plans to recruit 9 users of each substance. So when I said half an app, that was incorrect. They're actually going to have 9 kratom users, 9 psilocybin users, 9 MDMA users, and 9 LSD participants. Now, that's an absurdly limited population to do a valid study on, but they're going to argue, well, we're just trying to get an in-depth review and interview with those people, but they will obviously have the greater questionnaire completion rather than the interview for the 400 people. And I assume that they'll break those down into the 4 groups. You have to have used the substance that they're studying at least 2 times in your life and say that you will use it in the future. So if you're a kratom consumer, you obviously will meet that criteria as we go forward, because why wouldn't you if you've experienced the benefits of using kratom? You obviously are going to have used it in the past few days and in the past 6 months, and you're also going to be coming back to use it again. And you have to live in the United States. That's the design protocol for participation in the FDA study. And as I say, we're going to replicate that. You will have to meet those same criteria to participate, and you have to affirm when you sign into the landing page that you meet those criteria. So this is a great opportunity for us to be able to give input to the government that will be widely shared. It's not going to be a situation that we've encountered with the FDA in the past where they hide the ball. They don't publish the data, or they delay publication of the data. As soon as we have gathered this information, it will be public, and we are going to commence the review by these independent scientists to let them crunch the data and provide a report. It will not be the typical government study that takes 6 months or a year or 3 years in order to publish the data. So this will be a great opportunity for us to do that. I encourage everyone to participate in this study that meets the criteria, so that we have a very large database that can be evaluated and provide data to the people that are policymakers, which in this case would be the US Congress, and obviously would be helpful in state legislatures, in local governments, where we see the latest strategy for the anti-kratom people to go, since we're able to educate state legislators about the value of kratom. Now they're trying to end run us and go to those local communities, which is a big challenge for us. So I'll stop there. We'll open up to any questions that anyone has. And I don't know whether anyone's submitted questions yet, Ryan, if you can tell me. But we're obviously interested in giving any responses about questions you might have.
Mac, thank you. We unfortunately do not have the QA open tonight, as I previously referenced that it was. So if those can be submitted to my email directly, we will follow up with you immediately. But
Okay, I got a text while I was talking here, someone that I didn't realize we didn't have those open either, asking me about the status of the California bill. And let me just take a couple of minutes to explain where we are with that issue. The AB 2365 is a bill that the American Kratom Association worked closely for several months with the Global Kratom Coalition in order to convince them that the model for the regulatory scheme, which they self-describe as a robust regulatory scheme, they criticize us at the American Kratom Association for having a less rigorous regulatory scheme. We were able to get some of our recommendations adopted within the proposed draft, but not so much that it made a material difference in what is a heavy regulatory scheme that, by the way, has not been replicated in any other state. It's not even close. This is creation of a mini FDA at the state level, which will require enormous resources and a reconfiguration of the departments of health in the states that adopt this kind of a regulatory model, to the point that it will be so expensive, and I'll describe how expensive in a second. But that's our problem with this bill. And we tried. We continued to have negotiations, and we found that they simply were not listening to us. I suppose because they do not agree with us. And that was, of course, affirmed in an infographic that they published that showed the differences between the American Kratom Association and the Global Kratom Coalition. Of course, they were in their infographic saying that we're just too weak, that we're not trying to protect consumers. Here's the bottom line on it. What the Kratom Consumer Protection Acts do that we advocate for is to require of vendors to do essentially what would be required if the FDA were doing their job, meaning that they have to meet standards that are required under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Dietary and botanical supplements are not subject to a new drug regimen, and therefore they come under what's called the self-enforcement part of the federal law that requires that a dietary supplement or botanical supplement supplier and manufacturer has to report on any adverse events and provide an explanation to the FDA, and the FDA can take appropriate action. It does not presume that the product is out of the gate dangerous. It does not presume that there needs to be a rigorous investigation and regulatory scheme like you would have for a new drug. So that's the fundamental difference. But what's happening in California under the regulatory regimen that is proposed in it and which has currently been passed by the House and it's over in the Senate, I finally, realizing that the door was closed, testified to the California Senate Appropriations Committee about our concerns with the bill. Now, under the process that's used in California, the actual testimony really didn't mean much to the vote, but it meant a great deal, as it turns out, to the staff. And so the bill is currently held in what's called the suspense calendar, which will be cleared in the next couple of weeks. But I've had extensive discussions with the Senate Appropriations staff about this, and our lobbyists on the ground are now working with the bill sponsor and with the leadership to show them that some of the assumptions that are embedded into this bill are invalid. And in this sense, it is devastating to consumers in the state of California if this bill were to pass, because what the Department of Health estimated was that the cost that they built into the bill in order to, once it's passed, to be paid for by product registrations from manufacturers assumed that there would be 350 to 400 companies. That's not accurate. The best regulatory experience and the most long-term experience is with the state of Utah that passed their bill in 2019. They have 49 companies that are registered. So if you spread the cost that the California Department of Health had and estimated for registration of Kratom products, the first year cost would be $111,000. And every year thereafter is $83,000 to register to sell Kratom in your state. Contrast that to the state of Utah, where it's $260 to register your product. Think about that. $111,000 in the first year, $83,000 for every year thereafter to register your product to sell. Now that's going to do two things. It's going to eliminate virtually all small to mid-sized Kratom businesses from being participants in the registration process. They simply cannot afford it. So it will restrict the market to only those very high-powered and high-volume companies that might be willing to actually participate at that level. It is going to benefit just a couple of companies, and not surprisingly, it would benefit the company that is the proponent for the Global Kratom Coalition and its leader, J.W. Ross, and his product. It doesn't help the average Kratom consumer because you would have virtually all of your products eliminated in the actual regulatory scheme, and you will be left to what inevitably will result, which is a black market. And we all know what happens in black markets, and that's where you're selling outside of the regulatory scheme and the regulations are zero at that point. And so that's a very difficult problem for us to contend with. And so we're hopeful, and our lobbyists are working hard to try to keep the bill on the suspense calendar, and let's go back and renegotiate this bill next year. That's our goal. We're working hard to do it. Unfortunately, we're pretty far down the road with this bill because we thought we were dealing in good faith and kept getting promised that we would be able to have discussions, that even in the process as it went through the legislative process, and that turned out to be inaccurate, and I think deliberately so. So that's where we are in California. We're going to continue to fight hard. The outcomes there will be it's anti-competitive. It will limit products. It will create the black market. It will put consumers at risk. It will stifle innovation. You won't have new products that come onto the marketplace, and it will create a devastating impact on the kratom industry unless you're one of the big dogs that are playing heavily in that sphere. So that's clearly the problem that we're running into and things that we're fighting against. That our position has been consistent. We have a track record of having passed 13 Kratom Consumer Protection Acts in the United States. We understand that there are individual cases in some states where the legislatures want a different variation of the bill, and we've negotiated and worked in good faith in those states. But how can anyone imagine that the state of California wants this kind of regulatory scheme that will have this kind of fiscal impact when they have such a huge budget deficit? So this is a horrible situation when this bill, when it's passed, will require a vendor to pay $111,000 to register their product in the first year because they have some first year built-in costs that include consultants that will help them build the regulatory rulemaking. And then they have in the state of California, for any bill, they have an IT evaluation that costs about $1,600,000. So the first year costs are a little bumped higher, but every year after that, estimated by, and this assumes that there would be 49 registrants, which there will not be. But if there were 49, you would have to pay $83,000 a year. This is insane. And yet it's justified by the Botanic Tonics Group and the Global Kratom Coalition as necessary to clean up the kratom industry. No. In fact, the kratom industry is doing just fine, thank you. Self-regulation is working, and the states where the KCP has passed are functioning, and they're able to eliminate products that are bad. It's not a perfect system because the federal system isn't perfect, but there is a mechanism for the bad actors to be eliminated, and that's what we're really pushing for. So stay tuned on this. We hope we're successful here, and if not, we will have to live with the consequences that were foisted on us by a badly framed bill from the start and a failure of the Global Kratom Coalition to work in good faith with us to try to find a reasonable accommodation to legitimate concerns that we have about this legislation. So I'll stop there. I see there's some people are chatting, so maybe, Ryan, they found a way to avoid our not having the Q&A open.
There are. Will you have sample answers to the DEA questionnaire for our benefit? Also, lumping kratom with psychedelics is ridiculous, as you stated.
So this is an FDA survey, not a DEA survey, and we are not going to we're not going to give recommended answers, but the questions will be straightforward, and you will be able to answer them with your own experience. We want you to tell your honest response to the questions that are offered, and there's plenty of resources available to you on our website if you have a question on your own about how you want to reference particular research that's been done. All of that will be available to you, and you can rely on that. But we're not going to suggest answers. We're not going to give you a talking point. We want you to they're straightforward questions. We want you to answer those questions based on your own personal experiences in using kratom.
Great. And how is the Indonesian monetary system, quote, or quotation, I have money, you have product, different from us here in the States? Just curious.
So the problem is that there is a high sensitivity to the problem of price fluctuations for the farmers. These farmers, as I mentioned earlier, are indigent except for their ability to sell kratom products. And the concern has been that the farmers get a very low price for their product. Now, the reason for that, and it's not something that's accepted by the Indonesian government because they're dealing with the fact that their low prices are offered to the farmers, is that all of the risk is assumed by processors and exporters to ship kratom into the United States because of the current import alert. We need to resolve the import alert issue, and we're making progress for that. as we go forward with this in dealing with the FDA and with the Department of State and the Department of Commerce. We think we're having traction here, and maybe we'll have success with the import alert. There's also the potential for litigation after what's called the Supreme Court Chevron decision, which challenges the FDA's right to simply give an interpretation to the court of what they think the statute says. And I think there's an opportunity there for challenging the import alert, if necessary, in a court of law. But over in Indonesia, that's their problem. And so what they're trying to do is create a mechanism, which is a interference with free trade, where they're going to control the price that's provided and essentially set a price floor. Not something we agree with or support, but I think given their interest in doing so, we're going to do our best to make sure that it's framed without being too onerous on the export system. There are some other very complex issues that have been raised with the Indonesian government that are going to require a lot of discussion, including their wanting to limit raw leaf plant material being sent to India on the premise that in India is where the 7-OH products are coming from. That's simply not accurate. The most of the 7-OH material processing happens here in the United States. And it's just an interference with the free enterprise system. And I think by some vendors who want to block competitors who get their raw leaf material from India, and there's a lot of extraction that goes on in India, that this is just interference with the marketplace by people that don't have extract products. And you may guess who that is, but I think that's the problem we're running into. So we're going to work very hard to with the Indonesian government to help inform them about what some of the pitfalls are in their proposed regulatory scheme that they're working with. And we'll keep you posted as we have those discussions.
Thank you, Mac. And in your independent survey, how will you address the potential bias of the majority of respondents coming from the membership of the AKA, a Kratom advocacy organization? It seems like this will be the FDA's rejoinder once you share the results of the survey.
Well, it can't be any more biased than what they're doing when you look at their study design. And the answer to this is very simple. That all survey research that's done on Kratom has this bias that it is people, the people that respond to observational studies are people who are Kratom consumers, but that's part of the criteria here. So when we publish our link, this is going to be available to anyone. I mentioned earlier that there are going to be anti-Kratom people that will participate in this survey that we're going to, to actually circulate. They'll do that. The same is true for people that are not, quote, AKA supporters. We encourage them to participate in what is going to be an unbiased landing page that simply collects data and ships it off to the FDA as a part of the comment period. So I understand that there's always that potential attack, but the FDA would have a very limited target on us, given the way that we're using their own design, their own questionnaire, and letting people honestly respond. And we're not restricting it just to AKA supporters. We're going to encourage everyone who gets this to circulate it to all of their friends and family members and anyone they know that is taking Kratom. We'll also publish it in like newspaper, media outlets announcing what we're doing, and hopefully anyone can participate. We're not saying that you have to agree with the AKA in participating in this survey.
And how can we participate when the questionnaire is issued?
So we will send out a link that will allow you to click on that link and go to the landing page, and you will answer the questions that are in the FDA Federal Register notice, and then you'll be allowed to give your own narrative about your personal experience with Kratom. And you can also submit documents if you want. That's part of the process, but we'll get that to you within no later than 10 to 14 days. You'll then have 40 days to submit it. So we're not worried so much right now about the time frame, because we're going to have this up and running within the next 2 weeks at the latest, and that landing page will be available.
Great. And what do you think the chances are that California's bill will pass, given your experience?
Well, every legislative battle is a crapshoot. You just don't know. But if we're going to base this on the merit of the issue, with respect to Kratom, then I think it loses. If we're basing this on the fiscal impact, it loses. If we're basing this on good regulation policy, it loses. If we're basing it on the influence that's being in terms of campaign contributions and personal relationships, then we're in trouble. So we've got to make sure that our arguments, and that's what we're doing right now, overpower any of the personal influence mechanisms. And I don't begrudge people doing that. You know, giving campaign contributions is part of the deal. Having personal relationships with people is part of the deal. We need to overcome that with the truth about what the impacts, the adverse impacts of the passage of this legislation. This is not something I can give you any kind of a percentage guess on. I can just tell you we're working like crazy to try to derail this thing so that we can come back to the negotiating table and actually be a party to it, not listen to assurances from the Global Kratom Coalition. Oh, you'll get to have impact. We were barred from talking to the sponsor, and even today we haven't been actually been able to speak with them yet, but we're working on that right now. That's not a fair process, by the way. So that's just something we have to deal with, and we're going to fight hard. We've been in many of these battles in the past, and we have a pretty good track record. I'm hoping that we continue that batting average when we come to California.
Thank you. And do you have any updates on Wisconsin?
Wisconsin, the unfortunate outcome there was not because of Kratom. In fact, I just spoke to our Wisconsin sponsor today. He was deeply disappointed in the political outcome, which was that the Republicans in the House of Representatives in the Wisconsin legislature were unwilling to trade a voter integrity bill that the Democrats were pushing. And the Democrats knew how important the Kratom Consumer Protection Act was to Speaker Voss. And so they leveraged it. Now, Speaker Voss is about to issue a letter to the Controlled Substances Board directing them, since they have already concluded that Kratom does not meet the 8-factor analysis, he wants them to remove it because it doesn't meet the criteria under state law. So we're going to play that out, and we'll be back, of course, in January, fighting that battle in the Wisconsin legislature.
Great. And is the FDA trying to associate Kratom with psychedelics as a way to create fear?
I wouldn't go 100% that way. I'm 90% there. I think that it's not fear about Kratom. I think they're trying to conflate them together so that they can draw out information about experiences people are having, and they'll talk to people and they'll say, "Oh yeah, Kratom killed someone in my family," or "Kratom got me so badly addicted," and that kind of thing. Those are the kinds of guilt by association when you're in with a scheduled substance, psychedelics. I think it fatally infects the data collection, and that's one of the points we'll make separately from what is actually being solicited here for Kratom consumers to participate in giving their data. And like I said, it's going to be open to everyone. So every Kratom consumer who has an experience with Kratom that they want to make sure the FDA hears needs to participate in this data collection.
Right. And would consumers in California be able to receive Kratom from other states by mail?
That's an open question. I would say that the California Department of Health is going to try to stop that. This is the most onerous overregulation of Kratom that I've ever seen. It is not mirrored anywhere in the country, including at the federal level. If the FDA were regulating Kratom today, it would not be close to what is being recommended in California, because the Global Kratom Coalition wants to be the patron saint of protecting the consumer marketplace, but their definition of that appears to be just a very few products that they approve of, and not letting consumers to make informed decisions with products that are properly manufactured and labeled to determine whether they want to use that product for their health and well-being. That's the problem, and unfortunately, they're stubborn about it. They believe it, and they've been advocating this. They have said, the Global Kratom Coalition has said that they are going to go to the 13 states that have passed the KCPA in the next legislative session, and they're going to try to replace them with this regulatory scheme. They want to put most companies out of business, and they want to restrict access that you have to a very limited number of products, which interestingly, the products that qualify are only those that the Global Kratom Coalition supports. That's unfortunate, and I think it's wrong. That's why we've taken a view that if you meet the standards for introducing a product into the marketplace and you have a reasonable basis for its safety based on conditions of use, that, by the way, is the federal standard. If you meet that criteria, then you should be allowed to market your product as long as it's labeled correctly. You have a COA that's by an independent lab that certifies compliance, and that it has and you have an age limitation. And you identify what the Kratom product is. That's the limitation on a self-regulatory model that is adopted by the federal government that would be in place if the FDA were doing their job. And now we've got this, what I would characterize as an absurdly over-regulation model that's being promoted by the Global Kratom Coalition.
And what is the deadline for the questionnaire?
So we have 55 days before they're all due. You'll have in your hands the link, hopefully next week, or no longer than 14 days. You'll have this link to go on and do the questionnaire. We have to validate statistically. There are a couple steps we have to take, but it will be well in advance of the deadline for the submission of comments, and so everyone will have the opportunity to use it.
Great. And asking for a friend, will Kratom be provided as part of the survey?
So answering for a friend, no. The survey actually is going to ask you whether you've used Kratom twice in your life. That's the questionnaire. And so it really is about your consumption habits. It doesn't require you to take a Kratom product and then say, how am I feeling right now? That's not the purpose of this questionnaire. It's more general than that. So there will not be Kratom products provided to respondents to this questionnaire.
And is there talk of new parish or state bans in Louisiana? I heard a rumor about a state ban, but I haven't yet to see anything on this.
So there was an interesting report that I read yesterday that one of the parishes that's considering banning Kratom had a report from a state legislator who, and by the way, this is in a newspaper report, so you take it for a grain of salt, where this legislator said, oh, well, there was an effort to ban it and we're going to ban it. That is not true. Now, we couldn't get them to pass the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, but there's no appetite to ban it at a statewide level. And I think the governor would be inclined to veto any ban along the way. So I'm not concerned about a state ban on Kratom. I'm concerned about getting regulations in place so that these local parishes and police juries will not impose these bans because of their concern about the safety of Kratom.
And would it help your cause for Kratom brands to offer free Kratom products to people upon proof of filling out your survey?
Well, if vendors are willing to do that to get their customers to do it, that's up to them. The issue is whether you've used Kratom twice in your life, and that's the criteria. If a vendor wants to say, hey, would you please fill out the survey, and wants to give them incentive to do it, that's fine. But we're not doing that at the AKA level.
And I think the next few, we're going to send out.
I'm sorry, by the way, if you complete the survey, the FDA is offering you money. So it's not like we're doing anything odd here. If a vendor wanted to as an incentive to participate, offered a sample of a Kratom product.
Right. The next three here, we will be sending out a link regarding the survey. The survey company website is out of date and they offer no methodology in selection of participants. Can we force the FDA to reselect a company or redraft the entire proposal?
Well, I think that they've cooked the books on this and they've announced what the questionnaire is. They've announced the selected vendor. I don't think that would be a policy discussion for members of Congress to challenge what the FDA has done, and that's worthy of consideration. But I think for now, we're going to mirror what their questions are. We're going to follow the same study protocol, and we will just have far more respondents than they have. And we're going to have an independent group of scientists crunch the numbers and provide a report. And so that'll be very hard for the FDA to refute because we want to do this by the book.
Thank you, Mac. And where are we with Massachusetts?
So Massachusetts concluded their session, essentially. They have some other work that they're going to do, but Our bill was included in a very broad economic development bill, which did not pass because of some opposition. So we're going to be back at it in the upcoming legislative session in 2025 in Massachusetts. But the good news there is that the key committee people favorably reviewed and said that they would move the Kratom bill along. So I think we had to make some great educational process. This is just one of those states where it's a little bit slow in moving them going forward.
Right, and a separate issue, but I visited Manhattan recently, and all three of the three Kratom bars I knew of were suddenly shut down for health violations. Are there possibly covert initiatives to close these establishments down under what might be pretext?
So there's, I wouldn't call it covert. I think they're pretty blatant that the local public health authorities have decided to go on a tear about Kratom. It's hard to track down exactly the motivation for it. I'm sure that it involves the FDA and their crusade on Kratom. This becomes an interesting area where traditionally a finished product Kratom package is manufactured, it's packaged, it has labeling on it, and that's different from raw materials that are delivered to essentially a restaurant. And it's a whole different set of laws. We're fighting this battle right now with the Department of Agriculture in the state of Florida. And I just did some negotiations with them this afternoon, and they don't get this. And here's their problem. They say, well, we don't control Kratom bars. That's a whole different division. So we want to just regulate it the way we want to, but their proposed regulations will restrict the Kratom bars from being in business. And they want to slough it by saying, well, it's a different regulatory body. So we have to navigate those complex issues because typically the Department of Agriculture, for example, would not control a restaurant situation. And most of those restaurant situations are controlled by local public health authorities in local jurisdictions. Same problem in Nevada, in Las Vegas area. We're doing exactly the same problem here. The public health authority came in and said, if you're selling Kratom that's not prepackaged, you're in violation. And we're having to appeal and seek a waiver from the regulation that governs restaurant sales of Kratom and bring it into a food establishment registration. So very complex issues that we're just getting into. And as the popularity of Kratom bars expands, then we're going to see more and more of this issue.
Thanks, Mac. And already addressed, but just what is the FDA's obsession with the Kratom?
The FDA has a bias against all dietary and botanical supplements. That's why the Congress had to, in 1994, pass the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. The FDA hates that bill. They would like to ban all supplements and force them into the new drug application process. The FDA uses its other tangential authorities to block all Kratom research that they can, to block all Kratom products they can. They claim, as you can see from the FDA and Kratom website, which, by the way, on its face is not properly framed because they didn't go through rulemaking that's required under the Federal Administrative Procedures Act. But they have it up there, and they say that all Kratom is an adulterated dietary ingredient. That's not true. They don't have pre-market approval on a product that is a botanical food. The FDA, and they acknowledge that, but they still want to go after Kratom. And the key here is that a vendor cannot make a therapeutic claim or a structure function claim. Then the FDA has an appropriate authority over them. But if you just have a product that is under the definition of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, a food, not a conventional food, but a food, then the FDA has no authority over those products. So this is a tricky area. The FDA has abused their authority, and I think that new actions are going to be taken that will strengthen our position that the FDA needs to stay out of their overregulation and stay in their lane.
Perfect. And what should we do about the 7-OH problem?
So this is becoming more complex as we speak. We have taken the position that at the AKA that the naturally occurring metabolite in Kratom cannot exceed 2% of the overall alkaloid fraction of the plant, and that is in many of the Kratom Consumer Protection Acts. And the reason for that is that kratom is not a naturally occurring constituent. It starts to occur when the plant is picked and it's exposed to heat as a part of the drying process, and the development of 7-OH occurs. The activity, the psychoactive activity of 7-OH is different from the metrogenine. Metrogenine is a partial agonist, which means it doesn't go to the reward center of your brain, giving you that euphoric high, and it does not suppress the respiratory system, but rather it goes to the adrenergic centers. It controls pain, not as powerfully as an opioid. That's why it's a partial agonist. 7-OH is a full binding agonist, and it has potential for euphoric highs and for respiratory suppression. So the standard under the federal law, and this is where we get into a trap, we have to respect the existing law. So if there is a 7-OH manufacturer who has a reasonable basis to put their product on the market and under the conditions of use, which means they accept the liability for labeling as to what the recommended serving size could be. So if there is a 7-OH product that is manufactured under that standard, how can we step in and say, well, we don't care what the federal law says. This is the way we see it. So that's why we've taken this approach that it's 2% of the overall fraction, which means that that's going to be a potentially dangerous product. Some of the states went to 1%, and we started to adopt that as a 1% standard. And then we found out that really doesn't work. And so there's a promotion to say we're being asked to consider 1% of dry weight or 2% of dry weight. That may not be the perfect solution either, because at the bottom line, we're talking about the effects of a 7-OH product. My preference would be, and the AKA position is, that you have to say what kratom is. You have to say what it is. And kratom is not 7-OH if it's the predominant alkaloid or metabolite in a kratom product. So we would prefer that they not be allowed to call themselves a kratom product. And if they then don't do that and they call it a 7-OH product, then they have to meet the standard the federal law says. I can't make up laws because I don't like a product. And I know that there, for example, are a number of products that are on the marketplace today that are combinations of various substances, kratom and kava, for example. There is a scientist that gave me a report on kava kratom and said they are adulterated kratom products because, and then he fills in the blank with the fact that there hasn't been rigorous science that documents the safety of those products. But those product manufacturers have the same benefit of the pathway to market as a 7-OH product does, which is if you have a reasonable basis for safety, which would be based on consumer experience. And if you've been on the market for a couple of years and you can see there's no serious adverse events, and you have under the conditions of use, proper labeling, then you're on the market. And it's very hard for me to say, oh, I at the AKA can say, well, we don't like these products, so we're going to ban them, when that's not supported by the law. So this is a very complex issue that we're going to continue to work on, and we're going to continue to fight. Now, what I've just told you exposes us to the attack by the Global Kratom Coalition saying that we're soft on 7-OH. I'm not. I think that we should ban all synthesized products, because we know that to get to a dangerous level of 7-OH, you have to synthesize it. And that's something that we can easily say, because we don't believe in synthesized products. And you're seeing a strong effort federally and around the country on the states to ban synthesized cannabinoid products. And I think we can do the same thing with 7-OH. And a perfect analogy is that caffeine is approved by the FDA to be used in food as a food ingredient, but they ban concentrated caffeine tablets that are known to be dangerous. So the same thing happens here. We can find a way to craft a public policy under existing law in order to restrict the availability of 7-OH products that are so highly concentrated that they could not reasonably have any basis for safety. And I think that's the way that we have to address this. So however cumbersome it is, we have to respect what the law says, because that's how many of these kratom products are on the marketplace today. We can't have it both ways. So that's what I'm trying to do to navigate a very complex public policy arena that's going to require a lot of massaging before we get to the right answer.
Thank you, Mac. And what is the benefit of government agencies, state or federal, producing apparent misinformation about Kratom? Maybe a naive question, but why do people in these agencies care? Do they think they are protecting public health?
So it's not a naive question at all. It's the $64,000 question. Why would the FDA promote public policies with their disinformation campaign against Kratom, which is clear? They have published one report after another. You remember what then FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb did in 2018 when he held a press conference calling Kratom an opioid. It is not an opioid. There's no way. That is a lie. And yet he said it, and it's still on the FDA and referenced in the FDA and Kratom webpage. It is disinformation. Why do they do it? Well, there's only one reason that is rational and explainable, and that is you have a small group of people in what the FDA staff calls the C-suite, the commissioner's office, and they're hell-bent to ban Kratom, and they don't care about the science. They don't care that the body of scientific evidence that's been produced by $100 million of NIDA-funded research contradicts their position. They don't care. They don't care that when the FDA itself was called to participate in a federal court hearing that was supposed to have been taken, actually occurred on February 8th of this year, where they had to document what they've been saying for 10 years, that Kratom is dangerous, including Federal Register notices on the two submissions that they made under Factor 6 of the 8 factors under the Controlled Substances Act. The FDA declared under Schedule 6, or Factor 6, that Kratom posed an imminent threat to the safety of the American people. They said it on a federal document, and yet when called before a federal judge, they informed the U.S. Attorney's Office that they, the FDA, was not in a position to testify because they have not yet determined whether Kratom is dangerous. The C-suite commissioner's office doesn't care. They don't care about the fact that the FDA conducted a dose-finding study, which concluded that at 12 grams consumed in a 5-minute period with 12 horse-sized capsules, that all they got was nausea, and the nausea was with the placebo group as well as the Kratom group, because consuming that much material in a 5-minute period will make you sick. They don't care. So what we have to do is to be vigilant, and we keep pointing out as best we can to public policymakers why the FDA is wrong. And the FDA has been wrong about dietary and botanical supplements for decades, and they've been called to account in the past. We're going to make sure they're called to account with respect to Kratom.
Great. And do you believe we should not focus on leaving individual comments on the Federal Register notice that was published by the FDA and only participate in your study?
So no, you can certainly participate if you want, and nothing stops you from commenting on any way you want. They'll disregard them because and when you read the Federal Register notice, they're asking you to comment on those 4 technical things, not about the study itself. You're free to comment on it, but they'll ignore it. What they can't ignore is when we give them hundreds or thousands of comments and then crunch the data with independent experts and produce a report. They can't ignore that because it will rain on their parade, and they have to have some credibility in the end. So that's why we've adopted this strategy to do a coordinated data collection effort that will produce an actionable report that will align itself with what the questions they ask, and then we'll see whether there's a discrepancy between the 2 studies.
And I've recently moved from Missouri to Illinois. Can you get me in touch with anyone in the AKA so I'm aware of local legislative events that may require appearance for avocation?
So you need to send an email to ryan@americankratom.org and ask to be on our list, because we put out alerts all the time. Watch Facebook pages. Whenever we see a local ban that's proposed, we need to rally as many Kratom consumers as we can. These things often are done within a couple of days of when these local jurisdictions take them up. They often are at inconvenient times. This is difficult, but we have to do the best we can and get as many Kratom consumers present, talking, and local people talking about these issues.
Perfect. And then, is there any update on the legalization of Kratom in Arkansas? Also, you mentioned local bans. As a distributor, our company has noticed these bans coming up more and more, and even places without bans are being told by local officials, no Kratom. What can we do on the ground to help with this issue?
Well, answering the last question first, if there's no official ban, they can't enforce that. But this is spreading. and they're using, the FDA is using a variety of conduits to do that, and we're trying to interfere with that messaging. I was in Needham, Massachusetts a couple of weeks ago testifying to the Board of Health about their proposed ban, and this is what inevitably happens. One of the commissioners asked the staff person who had written the ordinance to ban kratom, and he said, "How much kratom is sold in Needham, Massachusetts?" And the answer was, "Well, we don't have any stores that are selling it here." Well, then why are we doing this? Well, because other jurisdictions are doing it. And we just don't want the problem to come to our community. And then, the question was asked, well, how many kids in our community are being, and that's the big, argument, are being influenced by kratom? Well, we don't have any reports on that. That's what happens. When we were in Des Plaines, Illinois, we stopped the ban, and then a couple weeks later came back, but the police chief said that he didn't have any reports. He was just hearing it from other jurisdictions. This is nonsense what they do. So we need our voices to be heard, and local voices are critically important. And so get on that list, and we'll keep you informed as best as we can.
And do you know how long it will take the FDA to publish the results of their survey?
That's a black box. I don't think it'll be soon. I think that what we're going to do is will be much faster, and it will have input into that final result. The government just moves slowly, but that's the hallmark of that kind of thing. But even if our effort accelerates their review, the data is still going to be there, and we can compare it and contrast it, and we can see where we differ. I think this will keep the FDA honest, because they know that they're going to have the same questions being answered by the qualified participants that independent scientists are going to be able to provide a report on. So I think we're going to keep them honest in this particular case.
And hi, Mac, in regards to the California bill, is there any effort that can be made to encourage more vendors to register so that fees are more fair, as opposed to trying to change the bill?
So if you register, you're going to have to pay the proportional share of the overall cost of the bill. And unless there's some unknown group of vendors out there that are larger in numbers than we have in Utah, which is 49, to register, the minimum registration fee is going to be $113,000 in the first year, or 111, whatever it was, and 83,000 going forward. If you can afford that, then fine. I think it's an unreasonable and unfair burden on any kratom company to do that, and we know who can afford it, and that's why it's so biased against the average kratom manufacturer. God love you if you can do it.
Okay, and will law enforcement be able to see who the people are that complete the survey, wondering if I need to worry as I live in Wisconsin?
Well, you can ask that your name not be associated with it. You won't have a problem with the Wisconsin people, I assure you. But as an abundance of caution, we'll make sure that on the landing page you can anonymize. We'll need to know who you are so we can report back, but we will not submit your name to the government. We'll make sure that we protect it.
Okay, and any updates on Florida?
Yeah, this is tricky. We're in the middle. We had negotiations that were going on with the participants in the negotiation with the Global Kratom Coalition, the American Kratom Association, Dr. Chris McCurdy, and a third-party philanthropist that's very influential in Florida. We went 4 weeks and reached an agreement that was blessed by Dr. McCurdy on a hybrid Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And within 2 hours, the Global Kratom Coalition came in and demanded additional considerations, which extended our negotiations another 2 weeks. What we did not know is the Global Kratom Coalition was in secret meetings with the Florida Department of Agriculture, and they were developing a bill which, based on comments that I've received from the FDAX people, the Department of Agriculture, they believed that the AK, because they were told the AK supported this effort. We did not. We were not participants in it. We didn't, and we object strongly to the language that was produced. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, the Global Kratom Coalition was asked whether or not they agreed to the hybrid bill that was produced, and they said that they did not. They conceptually agreed with it, but they did not agree to it. And I have emails which said they did agree to it. So this is stunning in terms of the duplicity that is being and the confusion that's being generated, at least as I see it, in my opinion, by the Global Kratom Coalition. It appears to be very deliberate. But that said, we've opened a communication channel at the behest of Senator Jay Collins in Florida, who is going to carry whatever Kratom bill is finally agreed to. And we've had extensive negotiations now with the Florida Department of Agriculture. There are things that we do not agree on that we're going to agree to disagree, but there are some things that we found common agreement on. The complexity is that when we originally passed the Florida Kratom Consumer Protection Act, in its framework, which did not have an enforcement agency, we properly called Kratom a food under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. As it turns out, Florida has their own food statute, and the argument by the Florida Department of Agriculture is that under their statute, there are requirements triggered for Kratom that make it very difficult for us to comply. So that's one of the issues we're trying to work out so that we can carve out space for Kratom to be sold, recognizing it is not a drug. And what the Department of Agriculture wants to do is call it a hemp-based intoxicating product, like the cannabinoids. And we want to avoid that. So we're in negotiations. I am optimistic that we're going to get to an agreement here, despite the interference that has been created by what I think is a self-serving attitude by one company that wants to control that marketplace. So we're going to do our best to work through that challenge.
Great, thanks, Mac. And I'm not familiar, but I0027 C0027.
I'm not familiar with that either.
Okay. And are anti-kratom actions being pushed by big pharma, lobbyists, and influencing FDA policymakers?
So when you define big pharma, there's a pharma industry that has a very powerful trade association. And I think that the big pharma trade association doesn't care about Kratom. I've had numerous conversations with their lobbyists, and I met some here at the National Association of State Legislatures. There are companies that sell pain products that are trying to put their finger on the scale with respect to Kratom. And so that is a challenge for us. And those individual pharmaceutical companies that market a product for which Kratom is a competitive product are going to be a problem. And so I think they are active in trying to influence public policy with respect to Kratom.
Back a couple of years ago, South Dakota had it in the legislature and they put it on the shelf. I think it is how they put it. Has there been anything heard about South Dakota and what they may try to do?
You are safe in South Dakota, a Kratom Consumer Protection Act sponsor, and it's a little bit challenging because they just want to leave it alone because they think it'll poke the bear for the person who previously wanted to ban it. That was a backdoor last minute thing that they did, similar to what happened in Montana. And we were able to swoop in and actually educate the legislators. I testified up there, and I think that we effectively educated them to know that the ban doesn't work. And our newest initiative about Kratom Safe includes a component, and we emphasized it here at the National Conference of State Legislatures. And I hope you'll watch the video when it gets released about the pitfalls of criminalization. And the real appropriate public policy on Kratom has to be regulations rather than just letting the free-for-all marketplace, the Wild West, maintained. So this is going to be a little bit of a process. We have to allocate limited resources, and thanks to everyone that supports us and helps us, that gets us into these states. But we have to pick where we have crises that we have to deal with. To go into California, which I think is completely unnecessary, was hugely expensive, and it takes money that we could have been using to pass KCPAs in other states. And that's a real problem going forward. I think I skipped over the Arkansas question earlier. The Arkansas legislature is going to hold an interim committee hearing on October, I think it's the 6th. We'll send out information. It is an informational session. And then we have a great sponsor who's a pharmacist, Senator Boyd, and he's committed to get this thing passed in 2025. So I'm very encouraged that we're going to have good progress in the state of Arkansas, as we will in Rhode Island again, by the way. The governor's office has indicated an interest in talking to us, and we're now setting up a time when we can sit down and have those discussions because it passed the legislature And unfortunately, the FDA put their thumb on the scale with him, and he didn't give us a chance to actually respond to it. But we've now got his ear, and I think we'll make some progress there as well.
Great. And thank you, Mac. Would the proposed California bill preclude kava bars from selling Kratom drinks that were brewed in-house if the bar did not register their drinks?
So that's an unknown question. I think it does. The Department of Health would have enormous latitude to decide that. I don't think they should. There should be a provision in there, as we put into the Florida bill or recommended in Florida. Same should be true in California, that protects Kratom bars being able to serve on site prepared Kratom drinks that they hand over the counter. That's important. And unfortunately, I don't think that it's protected under the California bill as it's currently written.
And could you speak on the overall attack on the deltas, CBD, Kratom, why, how to work better together?
Well, the problem with Delta 8 and Delta 9 is, of course, that they are a derivative of a controlled substance with the carve out for THC content of 0.3% or less. The question and the thing that's raging about these products is that they're intoxicating, and Kratom is not, except if you abuse it, and then you have to really abuse it. So there's a difference here. But the common issue we have is bans versus regulation. So we're going to try hard to push these localities to evaluate Kratom separately from Delta 8 and Delta 9 products because they are different in their composition and character, but understand that bans don't work. They just do not work, and regulating them is better than imposing a ban. And I think that argument applies equally to the cannabinoids as it does to Kratom.
Perfect. And where is the bill in Ohio?
Still going through the process. We're looking at a lame duck session. We continue to have discussions with the legislature, and our sponsors are committed to it. It's just one of those states where the process is so difficult because of the enormous power that is held by some of the committee chairs who can just say, I'm not doing that. And that's what we're confronting there in Ohio, but we're making slow progress.
Okay, and then a general question. Is it true that the dependency on Kratom is bothersome? Any info on reducing and withdrawals, even if it's for the cleanse? I'm supposed to take medication for BPP, but I can't until I get off Kratom. But so far, no health side effects except for mood issues. I consume 10 to 15 grams daily, 4.5 years.
So I'm not in a position to provide any medical advice because our attorneys don't want us doing that, and we end up in lawsuits over it. I would advise you to talk to your medical professional and follow whatever guidance is necessary. I think your experience with Kratom, obviously, it's helped you, and you consume a healthy amount. There are dependency issues that arise. You need to look at that carefully. We know that the profile of a dependency on Kratom as opposed to an addiction or dependency on opioids is far different, and so have to be treated differently. In the meeting that we had with NIDA last week, there was a discussion where the senior NIDA people were aghast that the position that the FDA has promoted is that you have to treat Kratom use disorder, which is a self-defined addiction recovery center characterization. There's no clinical evidence that suggests there is Kratom use disorder, but they're treating Kratom use disorder with buprenorphine, which is an opioid. And the senior NIDA staff were appalled by that, because why would you subject a person who needs to go through a process of 1 week to 10 days to wean off of Kratom when you have a dependency and treat it with a dangerous opioid that has a high addiction profile and is potentially deadly? Makes no sense to anyone, and yet that's what they're doing. So great question. I wish you luck in that journey, and I think you need to get some help with some medical professionals.
Thank you. And so does it seem like Speaker Voss from Wisconsin is in favor of removing Kratom from the CSA? And if so, what is the process to have that completed?
Speaker Voss is a champion for Kratom and wants to see this resolved, and his office is leading out with this effort to get the Controlled Substances Board to independently take action to remove Kratom from the scheduled list, and that will open the door and compel the legislature to regulate Kratom to make sure that Kratom that's sold in Wisconsin is safe.
And do we have a list of representatives that are outspoken in support of and or in opposition to Kratom?
In Wisconsin, or are we talking about
Separate question.
federally? Yeah, so we track every statement that's made about Kratom. So we have identified legislators who are friendly to Kratom, those that need to be converted. So we do that as best we can. This is a time-consuming and expensive process, so we do the best we can with it. I would not call it a perfect database, but we track it, particularly in the states where we're working, to make sure we know who we're dealing with. We have a robust list in Mississippi and Louisiana, and in Wisconsin, and some of the other states we're working in. So it depends on the state that we're working in to determine whether we have a good database or not.
Thank you, Mac. And our final question, and you can include your closing comments. Will a new White House administration help or hurt Kratom policy within the FDA?
So the FDA and their influence is driven largely by the commissioner that's appointed. And if there is a change in administrations, which there will be, it's likely the caliph will move on and you're going to have a new commissioner. So there'll be a period while that new commissioner is considered by the Senate for confirmation to that appointment. So typically the bureaucracies retreat and wait for things to happen. In this case, I think we have to be on guard because in that lull, I think the staff they'll be empowered because no one's watching over them to do it. But I don't think there's going to be any significant difference in the attitude of the FDA one way or another. And I think NIDA is going to continue on its course to be supportive of Kratom as long as it's properly regulated. And let's assume for a second that former President Trump gets elected. It's likely that the former drug czar, James Carroll, will be in his administration, and he's a great proponent of Kratom. He recognizes that the FDA made a mistake. He recognizes that the FDA refuses to admit they made a mistake, and he recognizes that, as Dr. Giroir said that the FDA relied upon embarrassingly poor evidence and data. So I think that we'll be able to work with whatever the administration structure is in order to move forward. One thing that we know, if Vice President Harris were to get elected president, we know that the idea that you criminalize people is not something that she supports. And so a ban would be very unlikely. And certainly you wouldn't have a favorable impression by the Department of Health, Department of Health and Human Services, because they have to submit a scheduling recommendation. And under the current rules that are adopted and a memorandum of understanding exists, NIDA has to sign off on any scheduling recommendation. And I know for a fact they're not inclined to do that as it currently sits, unless there's some new evidence that emerges out of the cloud, which I don't anticipate. I think we're going to be relatively safe from a ban on Kratom at the federal level. That's why the FDA is so focused on getting local bans, because they find that those local officials are very susceptible to messaging from the FDA because they are the god of all health issues. So we have to continue to fight diligently on those issues. And I know that was the last question. Great. Let me conclude with this. There are people in the industry and in the advocacy community that really are dedicated to good regulations and wanting to see Kratom products that are manufactured, that are labeled properly, and they're safe for consumption. We honor those people. We are going to go into our second round of Kratom advocates. They are Hall of Fame. The first round was for legacy people that were there in the beginning, and I think that we did a good job of recognizing those people. Now we're going to invite people to nominate Kratom Hall of Famers that are advocating in this space, and we welcome you doing that. You'll get a notice on that here shortly, and we'll open up that nomination process for, say, 30 to 45 days, and we'll have another round, and we'll keep doing this every 6 months because we want to recognize the people that truly are on the front lines, that make extraordinary sacrifices in order to promote Kratom and to protect its legality. The fact that we had people like Heidi Sikora, Melody Wolf, and Laura Romney with us this week, the fact that Misty Brown and Bud Smith were with us at the Champ Show, these are extraordinary advocates, and there are many that are in the trenches with us in the foxhole fighting this battle, and we want to say thank you to them and recognize those people. And we want to empower advocates to actually join the fight, and we want to do that in every way that we can. We're working with distribution networks where vendors and retail outlets are doing what they were hopeful will do, what they did back in 2016 when we had this organic effort where you went to the cash register to purchase a Kratom product and you were told to sign the petition that ultimately led to the DEA withdrawing that recommendation for scheduling from the FDA. We need to replicate that passion. We need to do what we can. It's a different environment. In some cases, we've had so much success that people are just fat and sassy and say, I don't have to worry about it. You do. You need to help us. There are some people that are confused by these competing groups that are out in the marketplace. I can tell you without question that there is one consumer advocacy group. Now, obviously, we rely upon vendors, both through our GMP program and through our advocacy program to help us to fund some of the lobbying activities. But when we speak for the consumers. And we are adamant on that. And you can look at the evidence to see who benefits from the Kratom Consumer Protection Act that we advocate for, which is obviously consumers, and who benefits for the Kratom bills that are being advocated by the Global Kratom Coalition. And those are a small group of companies. We want there to be a rational regulatory scheme that protects consumers as we go forward. Now, I've been hard on the Global Kratom Coalition, but you have to give them their due. They're producing some excellent materials that are educational. We welcome that. I think that their hearts are in the right place. They've just got the wrong, scheme for regulation, which I think is not workable, and it goes too far, and it's too expensive, and it's anti-competitive. It hurts consumers. It limits products, and it's anti-innovation. So we can work together on education efforts, and we can work together, but we're drawing the line when it comes to those public policies that get in the way of consumers having access to safe, regulated Kratom products. So that's the difference. I encourage everyone to look closely at both of us. I encourage everyone to join this fight so that we can articulate our message to these public policy people. And I think as much as we're focused on the states, we're going to have to expand our efforts to these localities. And we've already developed a program for it. It's enormously expensive, so we need your financial help for those that can afford to do it. Please take a moment to click that button when you get our messages and donate, because it empowers us to go and take care of these battles that we have to have with these local jurisdictions and at the state level. And we're continuing to pursue at the federal level that will force the FDA to responsibly regulate Kratom. So thank you to everyone. I'm sincere when I tell you how grateful we are that you're willing to stand up to participate in meetings like this. I know we've kept you a long time here, but we want you to be as informed as possible. Not everything that I say is going to be satisfactory. Some of the answers you may not agree with, but our hearts are clearly aligned in terms of our goal to keep Kratom safe and legal in the United States for people to use, informed consumers to use for their health and well-being. So thanks to everyone for all the great effort that you have.
Thank you, Mac, and thank you all. Have a great evening.